welcome into the Art Gibb Sports Business Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the NFL, and namely the salary cap, the draft, and how all of that relates together. This I view as a basic primer for understanding how the draft works, how the cap works, how it's calculated, and then some intricacies of the contracts and how all of that works. So today we're joined by Scott Carasik, who's done some writing in the past and work on sort of this capology subject. And in this episode, you get a great primer with a lot of questions answered, a lot of questions that I certainly had. That you hear these different terms uh, while you're watching the NFL and while you're hearing sports radio talk about it, but nobody kind of just addresses it head on. So this is how it works. This is the salary cap, et cetera, et cetera. And so we get into that here in this episode. Enjoy. All right. So we're joined here by Scott Carasik. And in this episode, I want to kind of just do an intro to kind of the NFL, some of the cap talk that you hear, contracts, drafts, all of that kind of stuff. Scott's got some knowledge on that. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me on, man.
Awesome. So I guess we'll kind of start at the beginning. Like what is in the NFL, what is the salary cap? How is that salary cap determined?
So the NFL salary cap was added because they wanted to do free agency, and NFL teams didn't want to do free agency because they felt obviously guys like Jerry Jones and the big market owners like the Barons up in New York would all just buy a championship. So they implemented a salary cap to keep the field very level, very fair. And it helps out a lot because it does give us a lot of the parity we see in the NFL today. I mean, NFL is arguably one of the more balanced leagues where, yeah, there are a lot of the same teams up at the top, but it's because they're well run, not because they're trying to buy a championship every year like baseball. So it's a lot more fair, and you do get those teams like the Jaguars this year where they make a couple of moves, make a couple of changes, and then boom, they're in the playoffs. They're making some noise in the playoffs. So that's why the cap is there. The way the cap really works is it takes all of the NFL's profits, all of the revenues, and it just is divided based off of a formula they have. So I do better when I kind of give examples. So let's say the NFL brings in 100 and or brings in $16 billion this year, which is give or take about exactly what it is. The players, through the collective bargaining agreement, have they'll receive 48% of that. So when you multiply it out by 48%, that's set $7.68 billion. There's 32 teams in the NFL, so that's about 240 million per team. And then you have to subtract out veteran benefits that every team contributes to of about $7 to $10 million. So we'll just say right now, just to use a roundish number, we'll say $8 million. So that would set the salary cap. And this is a really close number for what I think it's actually going to be this year, $232 million.
Okay. Yeah.
So when you're looking at $232 million, you have to keep 90 players under that cap number heading into training camp. Now, obviously, there are some rules to get around it, like it's called the top 51 rule. It allows you to have a bunch of undrafted free agents, a bunch of low level signings on what's called a minimum signing benefit contract, but that's a whole other rabbit hole. Essentially, all your contracts under about $1 million are not going to affect this number outside of their bonus money. Their salaries themselves won't affect this number until after final cutdowns. And that's why the top 51 rule was put into effect.
Okay. And that's a number is that adjusted every year or adjusted every like TV deal or
So every year the salary cap's different. So last year it was about 210 million, give or take a couple. I think the official number was 208.6, but you hear about carryover, cap carryover. Every team actually has their own individual salary cap number because they take the current number, that's the league number, and then they add whatever they carried over from the previous year, and that's their actual cap number for that team. The way the league officially does the accounting for it.
So does that roll over every year, and do teams have like that built up, or is it just like a 1 year
So
rollover?
you can roll over your salary cap every single year if you choose to do so. The average a team rolls over is anywhere between 3 to 5 million. So it's really not that much. And almost every team has about the same amount. You're going to have outliers this year, like the Chicago Bears, who are rolling over somewhere in the 20 to 25 million range. But for the most part, you can keep rolling it over. What's interesting about the NFL is with the salary cap, there's also a salary floor. So over a 3 year period, every NFL team has to spend at least 89% of what that salary cap is in actual cash dollars. So if it's 232 million over, we'll just say it's a flat cap 3 straight years, and then they have to spend 89% of that, that's $619 million over a 3 year span. Every NFL team has to spend that. That has to go to players. That has to go to contracts. It can be bonuses. It can be whatever you want. There are some teams that get around the cap floor on a year-to-year basis because they look at the 3 year average because they're so tight against their salary cap by giving massive signing bonuses, which is what happened with the Jaguars last year. It's another Jaguars reference, but they had to give a lot of signing bonuses. So they went ham in free agency. They got Aluakon, they got Kirk, and they started giving out all these massive contracts. Brandon Scherf, another guy with a massive contract. They gave these guys massive bonuses to bring their cash number up to offset the years that they weren't spending and they were rolling over cap.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. So you mentioned a little bit about like, through like the signing bonuses and through like a lot of the players under 1 million not really factoring into that cap. What you hear the term like cap hit. What exactly is that, and how does, say two players that are each making quote unquote 8 million a year have how do they have different cap hits to the team?
So cap hits can be calculated either in a very simple manner where a guy has a super simple contract. He has a signing bonus and he has his salary. Say his signing bonus over a 3 year span, it's a $6 million signing bonus. It's prorated each year. So instead of it being all $6 million in year one, it's 2 million a year for the 3 year contract, $6 million total cap hit. And then say his salary every year is $2.5 million. So every single year, he's going to count $4.5 million towards the salary cap because he's got that $2.5 million salary and that $2 million signing bonus proration counted towards the cap. Now, that signing bonus is normally paid out right away. There are times where it's deferred, but if it's a deferred bonus, it still counts as that proration, and you can only pay it out in the same amount of years as the proration. And teams will do that to, again, get around the cash aspect of it. When it comes to the other way, which is a heck of a lot more complicated. You're including workout bonuses, you're including option bonuses, you're including incentives, both likely to be earned and not likely to be earned incentives. So there's a lot of stuff that's involved there. Not likely to be earned incentives would be like JJ Watt got 10 sacks this year. Next year, if he gets 12 sacks, he gets this bonus of $10 million. Well, if he doesn't hit that $10 million bonus, it's not going to ever count towards the cap. If he hits it, it counts towards the cap in the next season, which is
Gotcha.
a whole other way to get around the salary cap. And that kind of value is normally not what teams are doing. They're doing like, oh yeah, if you hit the Pro Bowl, you never hit the Pro Bowl before, we'll give you $100,000. That's the kind of things they're doing with the not likely to be earned. Or, oh, you played 13 games last year. If you hit 15 games this year, we'll give you 50 G's. Not a lot of money is being put in those kinds of incentives, but they're still out there. The likely to be earned incentives are normally per game roster bonuses. You get $32,000 per game that you actually play and are on the active roster and you're wearing football pads. You get 32 G's, and it's just an added bonus to their check essentially.
Okay.
Um, I don't know why people do that instead of just making it their salary
Okay. And the guaranteed money, does that factor in differently into the salary cap, or is it just the fact that it's for sure going to be paid versus unlikely to be paid?
So you don't really worry too much about guaranteed money in terms of what the cap hit is going to be, um, because it's normally your signing bonus. That's the guaranteed money because it's already been paid, or an option bonus, which is basically an option bonus is essentially just a signing bonus, but paid in year 2 or year 3 instead of year 1. It's, hey, okay,
Okay.
we truly believe in this guy. We'll give him this option bonus. He's good to go. And that's generally what the main guaranteed salary number is. And a lot of times teams will guarantee, year 1, year 2 of the salary, pending injury, pending cap, pending forget the one, skill. So skill is they just fell off a cliff. They're no longer good. They lost whatever it was. They just had a giant brain fart and they're not good anymore. They don't understand how to play their position in football anymore. That is normally not an issue once you get to those years, because a lot of times those first 2 years of the contract, guy's playing great, still looks like the same kind of guy. Very rare is that an issue. Um, but they'll guarantee money. Now, if you're trying to cut a guy with guaranteed money and it's on salary, you have to pay him that salary. You have to. Now you can put in what's called offsets, where if another team signs him, they pay
Gotcha.
a
Okay.
portion.
It's kind of like a
But
coach. If they leave and they're still owed money, you got to
exactly,
pay that money, and that's going to count against the cap, basically.
exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, coaches don't count against the cap, thank God. But
Yeah. But I guess I'm, thinking in college or whatever you hear about that. Yeah.
oh yeah, you'll hear about that in college all the time. Those coaches' contracts in college are just insane, though. That's a whole other conversation.
Hmm. So how does that the cap factor into the draft? You hear about a player gets drafted, they get paid some number in the first round and some number in the second round. Are all the contracts the same in that round, or is there some type of negotiating that takes place with the player and the team that drafts them?
They kind of stole a concept from Major League Baseball. There is a slotted salary ish range that they do for every single spot. And by setting it up that way, they make it to where NFL teams don't have to pay a ton of money on these rookie contracts. So a third round pick is going to make essentially what in his slot about the same of what the guy last year did, plus or minus 30 to 45K. Going to be about the exact same contract, same guaranteed money. All of that's going to be the same. Obviously, certain positions will get more guaranteed money. Like, okay, well, I want my first and second year salaries guaranteed because I'm a quarterback and I want to make sure I've got a spot to sit and learn. Where other positions like kicker, punter that are drafted in the late rounds, they're going to have minimal guaranteed money, positions too volatile and not valuable. Um, you could even throw fullback in there. Kickers, punters, and fullbacks, three least important positions in the game of football. They're also the lowest paid compared to every other position.
So
So
what kind of, I guess, leverage does the player have in making that negotiation once they're drafted? Like, I know before that, before you got totally slotted in, you'd hear about like Matt Stafford getting a big salary, being drafted early. Uh, I guess just like total layman here, like if you're drafted, what leverage do you have to say I want X amount or whatever?
Before
Um,
the 2011 collective bargaining agreement, you
sure,
had a
before
lot.
that and then now. Yeah.
You had a
Like,
lot. You could be like, well, I don't want to get drafted by the Rams unless they pay me. And then the Rams would give you a fully guaranteed 5-year contract. And you'd be like,
and if
we're
you
good.
didn't, if you, so you just, it was sort of like you just didn't play for the Rams and then you wouldn't play for anybody, or how does that work? Like once they sort of
So,
drafted you.
yeah, once you get drafted, they have your rights for at least a full season.
Okay.
So at that point, you could sit out. John Elway famously sat out a season when he got drafted by the Colts. And then the Broncos drafted him and he started playing for them. But he was in minor league baseball at the time, so he had something to do. It wasn't like he
Sure.
was just doing nothing. On the flip side of that, unless you're a two-sport guy, a three-sport guy, getting drafted is basically like that's the team you're with. That's the team you're going to be with your entire career on average until you potentially hit free agency year 4, 5, 6, 7, even farther down the line. Because that team that drafts you essentially has your rights for the first 4 years of your career if they want them. Um,
And now post 2011, they have it basically at a set price
yeah, now
to
they
some
have it at a
degree.
set price.
Yeah.
So there is variation in rookie salaries. There is variation in rookie deals year to year. It's not nearly what it was. It used to be, Matt Ryan got 60 million and then um, Matt Stafford got 65 million and then Sam Bradford got 70 million and then 2011 hit and Cam Newton got 16 million. Like that was his contract. So it's not as easy as it used to be for a rookie player to get a bunch of money. But again, on the flip side, mid-level veterans, high-level veterans, now they're getting big contracts. Once you get to your second deal, you get a big contract. So it's a give and take. But I mean, we're seeing record deals all the time, especially for quarterbacks, man.
Yeah, of
50
course.
million for a single player is just insane to me. As a number crunching guy, like that's the salary for what it's worth. The original salary cap was like $54 million. So seeing one player get $50 million, you're like, that's the whole cap. That doesn't make sense. Does not compute.
But isn't there some kind of stat or something where like it's like the top five highest paid quarterbacks, like they don't actually, like their teams sort of suffer by them being so highly paid, and the teams tend to not do as well. And some of the quarterbacks that make it a little easier on the cap have more weapons around them, or is that just
I
recent
mean,
anecdote?
yes and no. It all comes down to how well do you draft because that rookie contract is the money ball, essentially.
Sure.
If you can build a roster of essentially 35 guys on their rookie deals and have a lot of draft picks, and even if you're, and that's even including like undrafted free agents as well, just like 35 guys on their rookie deals, maybe 17, 18 guys that are on their, on the, well, probably 12 guys on like a mid-level deal and then five like big contract guys including that quarterback. That's the ideal that teams are really looking for, but you need those 35 guys, that bulk of your roster, to play lights out, at least play NFL average for their position, so that the
Sure.
big money guys you're paying and the high level quarterback you're paying are worth the money because the guys around them are playing crazy ball, you
And so
know.
is that what kind of the best teams do? Is they just have crazy scouting and they get a lot of guys at sort of below value
Yep.
year after year? That's kind of the secret
That's
sauce, or
that's the Baltimore Ravens way. That's what the Patriots did with Brady. That's what, you know, the Colts did for all those years with Peyton Manning. They were always competitive. It's what the Falcons, I mean, Falcons were trying to do with Matt Ryan here, but they had some issues. It's what the Jaguars have been incapable of doing for years. they haven't even been able to find the quarterback to give the big contract to. So a lot of times these teams are hunting for that quarterback, and then once they get him, they try to surround him with stuff. Um, but yeah, it's just every team builds so differently.
And is there anything to the idea of like trading down in the draft or anything like that? Or is that just kind of year to year, depending on what a team may or may not need? There's not necessarily like a formula to always trade down or something like that.
So you've got guys who believe in targeted picks, like you've got your guys, and if your guy falls, go get that guy. This guy's got a blue chip grade, but no one else behind him does, so you go get your blue chipper. I love that theory for certain spots in the draft, like end of the first round. That to me is a great theory. Trade up to the end of the first round, get that fifth year. Money wise, it makes sense to get that fifth year because it's going to be cheaper than paying him a big contract right away.
Sure.
But on the flip side, if you're picking top 10 and you can trade down and pick up an extra second or third round pick, that's what you should be building your team with. Second and third round picks after year one should be a starter. Like those guys that you're taking second round, third round, fourth round should end up having starting value at some point. Because their contracts are so manageable too, they're not going to cost you a lot until they get to year four. Unless they just explode, then you give them a contract after year three, keep them under your control, pay them below what the future market's going to be. Future value of money is always worth more, so you got to look at it that way. Pay them less now, have a better contract for the future.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really fascinating. Um, that's really all I've got here. Is there anything else you want to add? Anything else that you think would kind of sum up, that basic look at the cap, at drafting, etc.?
I mean, we were just scratching the surface. I mean, like they say tip of the iceberg. There's the tip,
Yeah.
and
Well,
then there's the
what are
iceberg.
some of the other
Like,
components, maybe an introduction to some of the other components or things to
so I
free
mean,
agency or anything like that,
with
or
well, and that's the thing. There's so much about this that the draft is based off of who the worst team is, but it's not always the worst team because of trades and the real moneyball aspects of the sport. There's so much you can get into just about the cap alone, and people don't realize it really does affect the draft that year or the free agency picture that year or
so
like
what about that the idea that, the worst team isn't the one that necessarily drafts first always? What affects that or makes that bounce around a little bit?
who would you say was the worst team this past year?
Um, I don't know, maybe the Texans.
The Texans.
Some,
And where are they picking in the draft?
I'm not even sure.
Number 2 overall.
Okay,
So the worst team in the league still didn't get the best pick
sure.
because they won a game in a garbage time week that was thrown by their opponent so that they would get a lower draft pick,
Interesting.
so that the Bears would get the number 1 pick. Well, the Bears are picking number 1 overall, but are they really the worst team? I don't know. They got a franchise quarterback. Do they have a lot of holes? Granted, yes, the Bears have a lot of holes. They're still a pretty bad team. I would still say there's about 4 or 5 teams that I would say are worse than the Bears. Very quickly, very easily. I'm
And
just
so
pulling it
that's
up.
based on who who they beat, or what
Based
kind of
on
drives that?
based on just the rosters that you see. Like, I don't think the Cardinals
Or
are
I
the
guess
third
I
worst
mean
team
in
in the
terms
league.
of, sorry, I mean in terms of like why, if they're not the worst team, why did they fall? Just based on who they
Oh,
specifically lost to, or
so the draft order is based off of 2 things and 2 things alone.
okay,
It's based off of how many games did you win? What's your win percentage? And then what's your strength of schedule against what teams? So with the draft order, just based how it is, Chicago Bears had a 3-14 record. The Houston Texans had a 3-13-1 record. The Bears went against a strength of schedule of 571. which was the best in the league, the toughest schedule in the league. The Texans went 3-13-1 against a 481 schedule, which was the fourth worst in the league, fifth worst in the league. So the Bears winning 3 games against the toughest schedule makes sense when they've got all the injuries and the roster holes they have, and considering they traded away 2 of their best defensive players halfway through the season. The Texans going 3-13-1 against the fifth softest schedule in the league, they're just the worst team, like, period. Arizona, they lost their quarterback midway through the year. They're a better team than what's suggested. Indianapolis, they were just a mess from the coaching top down. They were a mess. I would say they're probably the second worst team in the league. Denver, which was arguably the third worst team, doesn't even get their pick because they traded it to Seattle for Russell Wilson, who put him in an even bigger bind because of the salary cap hit that he has. And because he's playing at a well below level guy, his guaranteed money is keeping him stuck there. He's going to start in Denver for another 3 or 4 years. And they're stuck with him. And they're basically screwed.
Yeah.
And it is what it is. The Rams were a bad team because they lost their starting quarterback. I don't think they're as bad as they showed up. I don't think they're the sixth worst team, but they don't get their first round pick because they sold their soul to Stafford for a year, won a Super Bowl, which is what it's all about. And that pick now conveys to Detroit, who's going to probably take a quarterback. Like,
Yeah.
so much about it.
And so when you pick in the first round, say second, do you pick in the second round second? I guess assuming you haven't traded away those picks, or is there so much trading on those lower rounds that it never quite goes like that?
So, what's crazy about the order is it actually rotates through the rounds. So, if you have the exact same record, like say you and another team were 4-13, it'll still rotate a little bit through the rounds. So you might end up being, um, we'll just use Carolina here, right? They're picking ninth in the first round. They're picking eighth in the second round. And then they drop all the way down to 77th or 13th in the third round because you're going to rotate through those picks. It's crazy how that works. The idea is that, yeah, you're just as bad. Yeah, you got that higher pick, but just because you got that higher pick in the first round doesn't mean you weren't just as bad as these other teams with the exact same 7-10 record.
Sure. Okay.
So it's a penalty for the worst, but it's also like it's a boon for being not the worst, but at the same time, it all it all evens out in the wash through the 7 rounds. And then yeah, there's a lot of trades after the first round. Even in the first round, there were 5 trades this year and a forfeited pick.
Yeah. Have you heard of the that like the Jimmy Johnson point thing in drafting that you've got, a first round is, you know, this pick is worth, 3,000 points or whatever. And so you want to try to just
Yep.
maximize those points that each pick is worth and sort of trade down or up accordingly.
So there's like 6 different value charts right now based off of that Jimmy Johnson value chart. And
Okay.
they're all completely different. You've got guys like um, Jason and Brad over at Over the Cap. They've developed one that's based off of salary. You've got guys over in Stanford University who've done a study on it in their sports business department. So many different thought processes behind the Jimmy Johnson trade chart.
Sure. So he was kind of the first, but there's a lot of systems developed now.
Oh yeah, a lot of
Okay.
different systems. Sorry about my dogs, by the way.
No, no, you're good. I can't even hear that. But yeah, well, all right. Well, let's leave it there for now to kind of keep it basic. We've got an audience from, all different types of sports. But I really do appreciate you coming on because uh, just as a kind of a minor football fan, you hear all this stuff and you've got all these questions. And so I think you illuminated a lot of that there, and I appreciate you coming on.
Of course, man.
And where can people find you if they want to hear more of what you have to say?
So a lot of my musings are related to the Atlanta Falcons. I'm on Twitter at Carasik S. I'm not currently writing for anybody right now. Um, Still kind of just working on. I'm helping a buddy out with his draft guide, so I'm gonna have a couple thoughts on there on how the cap really does affect the draft. But just really trying to figure out the best spot for me. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter. It's at Carasik, Carasik, and then S for Scott.
Okay,
And yeah,
perfect. All right. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.